On Wednesday mornings at this time, we check in with the Blacklock's reporter, the only reporter-owned and operated newsroom that covers our nation's capital. The managing editor there is Tom Korski, who joins us every Wednesday morning at 10. Good morning, Tom.
Morning, Mike.
How was your Canada Day? Did you celebrate accordingly?
I got my chores done. Thank you for asking.
Glad you did. I think I got a few of them done, too. I left a few for the next holiday. When is the next holiday, anyway? It takes a while.
Oh, August Bank Holiday.
Okay.
Isn't it?
I'll keep it in mind. Okay. I'll just push off.
They don't call it that. They come up with more romantic names. We just stick with Bank Holiday.
I like Bank Holiday, and I'll bank my honey-do list until then. You know, another thing that happens on Canada Day, Tom, besides you and I finishing some chores around the house, is that people get honored with the Order of Canada. And I read the list, and then I read it a second time looking for your name. Unfortunately, it wasn't there, but I did come across the name Stephen Lucas, a former Deputy Health Minister who was awarded the Order of Canada.
Which is a lot more fun than the reception he received at the Commons Health Committee in 2001 in the day. What did Stephen Lucas do? As Deputy Health Minister, they had oversubscribed to vaccines and paid top dollar. You know, those vaccine contracts to this day with 7 manufacturers have never been made public. Auditors have guessed that the feds paid up to $30 a dose, which was about twice the commercial rate. What did Dr. Lucas do? Not a medical doctor, by the way. Well, he approved the distribution of date-expired vaccines from AstraZeneca on the advice of the manufacturer. And when he was asked about this, it was pointed out that the World Health Organization had disapproved of this practice. Don't distribute date-expired vaccines. Follow the science. And Lucas decided not to. And he said, when questioned sharply by Conservative and New Democrat MPs, said, well, the manufacturer said it would be okay. You know, Mike, you and I have discussed in the past, there's never been a judicial inquiry into pandemic management and mismanagement in Canada to this date. Other countries have had them, Italy, France. The indictments have been flying in France for years. And when you don't have the full answers and the whole truth, you get mythology. And here you have now this man given a high civic honor for national service. What did they call him? They gave him a prize for leadership as Deputy Minister of Health during the COVID-19 pandemic. And how?
And how? In that same vein, Tom, and what we paid and will never see again, I guess, some of the CERB cheats will not be tracked down?
Isn't that an interesting point? Here we are. You're right. All the chickens come home to roost. We always say in the newsroom, Mike, we find out everything in time. The question is always timing. There were billions in mystery payments under the Canada Emergency Response Benefit Program. Parliament budgeted at $24 billion. It came in at $83 billion. We've seen through access to information there were thousands of 15-year-olds, the little scammers, were hanging around the parking lot at junior high schools and figuring out how to get their $2,000 checks. Well, the Department of Employment, in a report to the Senate National Finance Committee, confirmed that billions were paid that were questionable. And they will not say what the follow-up was in terms of write-offs. But for the first time, they are beginning to write off as uncollectible millions and millions of dollars that were paid to people who were not eligible. This was supposed to go to jobless taxpayers facing foreclosure or eviction. They found there were people already getting employment insurance checks who then claimed the CERB check. They were getting it coming and gone, Mike, and they will not say what taxpayers are on the hook for. The department, literally, they wouldn't tell senators, they wouldn't tell us. We've had to file an access to information request.
We know that the cheating occurred, but we've just decided to give up chasing down the cheaters.
Oh, in the case of the Department of Employment, they had their own employees claiming CERB checks. None of them were reported to the police for fraud. You had to sign the oath, you remember, on the famous website? That was it. Just click a box, I'm unemployed, I'm right up against it. They had cases where their own employees were claiming these benefits. the cost to taxpayers. The kids are going to be paying the interest on those bonds, their working lives. Mike, that was all borrowed money. $81.6 billion gone forever.
Tom, your story about the audit at Natural Resources Canada caught my attention because earlier today on our show, we had a call from a gentleman who talked about his previous work in the corporate world, where they had this follow-up to anything they implemented called the PI, the Program Implementation Evaluation. After the fact, did we meet our stated goals? And I'm not sure at Natural Resources Canada, this audit found that indeed the agency did meet its stated goals.
$300 million in green climate change subsidies went out. What was the point of the program? The point was to subsidize clean energy. The stated purpose was to create jobs. They said so. We're going to create jobs and we're going to lower emissions. 7 years in, the auditors come back with their clipboards and say, there's some bad news here. You cannot prove whether you created a single job, any jobs. And you cannot demonstrate that you lowered emissions. You know what was worse? The managers of the program stopped asking. They knew it. They knew it. This is called value for taxpayers. You said it. This is why we have value for money audits. That's money. That's $300 million people paid. And they not only couldn't verify the claims they made, they stopped checking. They couldn't even be bothered opening that cupboard anymore to see any jobs in here that, the feds in early days, 2016, 2017, Mike, they used to give specific job figures. 50,000 jobs we're going to create with this, 56,000 with that. They finally stopped because that became too dangerous. It was demonstrable that they'd made up numbers. And now they've acknowledged that they've simply made up whole claims. They couldn't prove any job creation.
Before I let you go, Tom, while we were either busy choring or getting set to chore, Prime Minister Carney canceled the digital services tax in an effort to placate President Donald Trump. And it sounds as though maybe the Prime Minister is getting a little testy around accusations that he caved to his neighbor to the south. There were opposition MPs used that blunt language as well as Trump. What do New Democrats and Donald Trump have in common? They both say that Carney caved. Their words, not mine. The Prime Minister called a scrum with reporters to offer some cursory explanation for this. A reporter asked him, I quote accurately, "Did you get anything in exchange?" And Carney replied, "It is part of a bigger negotiation," as his voice grew fainter as he walked down the hallway. It was not a confidence inspiring. Mike, that was a big deal. They were counting on that money, almost $4 billion in tax revenue over 2 years. Tom, as always, appreciate the great work that you do at Blacklock. Thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you, Mike.
Tom Korski is the managing editor of the Blacklock's Reporter. It is the only reporter-owned and operated newsroom that covers our nation's capital, and I would encourage you to check it out and maybe even fund by way of subscription because it's worth it at blacklocks.ca. On the point of the Prime Minister potentially caving, the language being used by not just opposition MPs, but others, we're working on getting that a guest to talk about with us on the show tomorrow morning, and we can dive in a little bit further and get your feelings on that issue as well, because it was a big one that kind of happened while we were paying attention to other things. This is the Mike Farwell Show, 570 News Radio and Rogers TV.